Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife review for you. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Kizer Kala, and you can see back there on this side both the name Kala as well as Matsuka, which is the designer's name. That's Scott Matsuka from Hawaii. And if you think there's maybe a little bit of Ken Onion influence going on here, those two have worked together. I mean, you know, both being from Hawaii, it kind of makes sense. And a little onion flavor is not a problem for me. I kind of like those flowing lines that he does. And so you can sort of get that influence here just a little bit. Otherwise, I do really like the combination of sort of, I don't know, looking different and interesting, while at the same time being a very functional cutting tool. This is definitely a knife that has a look to it, has some distinctiveness to it that makes it stand out from the crowd, but yet we're not sacrificing anything in terms of performance. So that, I think, is a big win on the design end of things. This, of course, is the Vanguard series, meaning G10 and VG10, rather than Titanium and S35VN on the Bladesmith series. And again, I like the Kizer Vanguard knives. I've been very impressed with all of the ones that I have had, and this one is no exception. And I feel like the value is a little more there. You know, a lot of the higher end Kizers, I don't know. I feel like in most cases I'd rather have a ZT or a Wee knife or something else. The Vanguard series, though, I really think is one of the areas that Kizer really shines. And this one is pretty well done, as has been my experience with the others as well. Let's go ahead with size and weight on this guy. This is a pretty big knife, so right up my alley. And I know a number of you viewers like the larger knives as well. 5 7/8 inches overall. Nice big 3 3/4 inch blade. Now the handle length here when closed is just over 5 1/8 inches. So basically just call it 5 1/8. You can just barely not see the line there on the ruler when you measure it. So that handle does provide lots of real estate for you. The weight on this guy, 5.8 ounces, which is a little hefty, but I don't, I've carried this knife quite a bit and I find it carries very comfortably. And one of the reasons for that is it's not super thick, but also the contoured G10, any knife that I've had with nice contoured G10 like that tends to be a little more comfortable in pocket. So that's really nice, especially in a larger knife. If you look for knives that have those contours, you'll find they tend to be a little more comfortable. And certainly this one is nice and comfortable in pocket. Let's take a look at this VG10 drop point blade. Medium flat grind here, stonewash finish, a bit of a swedge up here. One of the things that I want to point out here is look at my finger down here. I'll use my index finger so it's easier to refer to. They've stopped sharpening sort of a little bit short. And well, I'm glad they did that for a couple of reasons. One, it makes it not a recurve, okay? But two, it also gives me some space for my pointer finger to come up here, my index finger to have a bit of a almost resting spot if I really want to choke up on the knife. So not a choil by any stretch, but it does give me a little bit of a purchase point there. So I do like that. In terms of usefulness, VG10 is a good steel, decent edge retention, decent corrosion resistance. And in this knife at this price point, I think it's a perfect application for VG10 steel. I definitely have no issues with it. The way this knife is built. And we know VG10 is pretty much the go-to steel for the Kizer Vanguard series. It's nice and thin behind the edge, and it's not super thick blade stock to begin with. So this knife does slice pretty nicely, but it's actually balanced fairly well. It's not, if this was like a full flat grind, you could say, yeah, this is just about slicing, but they've given you enough material and even carried that material out to the tip here to make this, a little more robust, have a little bit of extra strength to it. So it's a nice balance, I find, between, a fairly heavy duty user type knife and something that's just really slim and all about slicing. They've struck a pretty good balance here. Lockup and deployment, let's talk about that next. So this is a liner lock with a flipper, and the action on this is pretty good. It's not, let's say this, the action on this knife is appropriate for its price point. It's not the most amazing action that I've ever felt, but it's pretty darn good. It flips reliably. The one little complaint I have here is I would like to see a bit of jimping on this flipper tab every once in a while. Like, it's not common, but I have had my finger just slide off of the knife. We'll talk about the other jimping when it gets to ergonomics. That's a bit of an issue for me. Again, not a huge thing. Now, I want to say this. One of the things that's interesting about this knife is the work that they've done in creating this ball bearing pivot. I'll show you some pictures here now, but I want you to notice the way that they have milled out that track for the bearings on both sides, on the blade side and on the liner side. I think that's just an extra touch of detail, an extra touch of quality that I definitely appreciate, considering this is supposed to be sort of the step down line, right? This is supposed to be the cheaper knife, and you'd expect them to cut a few corners, but they really went above and beyond there. So I do appreciate that. And I'm sure that the longevity and the general quality of that action is impacted by that extra little bit of work. In terms of lockup, it's a pretty solid lockup. I can muscle just a teeny bit of movement. Now, honestly, I used this knife for about a week and a half before I realized, like, you know, all the cutting I was doing, all the times I was playing with it, flipping it, I actually didn't notice an issue. And so that kind of tells you how slight the blade play is. It's like just barely there, but it is there to an extremely small degree. So overall, I'm really, really impressed with the lockup and deployment on this knife. Good, strong lock. I like the thickness on the liner there. That's one of the things you'll often hear me complain about, but this, and the Kizers generally do a pretty good job, and they have here. Give me a nice thick liner, so very confidence inspiring. Let's move on to construction and ergonomics of the handle. For construction, we have these nested stainless steel liners with G10 scales. And I've got to say, I really, really like the way they did that. I'm a big fan of nested liners. I find it just makes the knife look more finished, just a cleaner look overall. They have milled out, let's see if I can show you here. Maybe this side would be better. There we go. They have milled out the liners there to save some weight. It's still 5.8 ounce knife, so it's pretty hefty, but I appreciate at least them trying to do that. The nice hole pattern here, one, I do think it looks good, but more importantly, it does add a bit of purchase, not only for gripping the knife, but when you're flipping it, you know, I can get a little bit of traction with my thumb there. And again, well done on that aspect. Now let me add one point here. The clip is just a standard spring clip. It works really well, goes in and out of pocket very nicely, and I definitely like the placement. However, there's no option for the lefties out there. Now, I know some of you lefties don't care because you prefer to see knives that are actually, you know, where the lock is actually moved to the other side, and since this one doesn't have that, then it's sort of like, why bother? I don't know. If you're a lefty and you want to weigh in down below, if you whether you skip this knife or not, I'd like to hear it. So in terms of construction, I'm pretty pleased. Now, the next thing is probably even a bigger win. There's one little hiccup here, but I've got to say, this knife is very, very comfortable in hand. The contouring on the G10 and the way that this handle is designed, it just naturally drops into your hand very, very well. It does give me the option to get my finger up here and choke up, and I really, really like that because they've done it in a very subtle way. And, you know, it's not a huge choil here. It's not that I notice a big piece of the blade missing, but I do have that option, and I really, really like that. So in terms of ergonomics, you know, no hot spots, just really, really great in all kinds of different grips. And lots of real estate on this large handle. So the biggest win on this knife, in my mind, is the ergonomics. And you combine that very comfortable handle with a very highly usable blade, and that's just, you know, that's a win all around. So I'm pretty happy with this knife, generally speaking. The one point that I will criticize a little is the jimping here. This is sort of like the Benchmade jimping, where it's under the liners, and I never find that jimping works very well. It would have been nice to see this jimping carried out here onto the blade a little bit, because this is where my thumb always lands when I'm holding the knife, and I'm surprised that and I'm sure most people's thumbs would land here. So it would have been nice to see some jimping extended out here. That's about the only thing, and really, it's a very minor criticism. The knife is very comfortable. It retains in hand very, very well. So the fact that there's no jimping there is not really an issue. But I did want to point it out. It would have been nice to see a little more there. Let's grab some comparisons now. There are a couple knives that this sort of reminds me of. One, of course, is the Rat Model 1. This is the one in D2, but you can see, you know, it's a liner lock, similar size, a little, you know, similar weight, although the Cala is a bit bigger. But again, both of these, are really, really user-oriented knives that fit well into that category. The other knife, though, that this one reminds me of is definitely the Cold Steel Ultimate Hunter. The blades just sort of have a similar feel to them in my mind. They're not exactly the same, and I certainly like the steel much, much better on the Cold Steel. And perhaps the Cold Steel leans a little more to being tough and robust, which I do prefer just a little. Okay, but I don't know. I find these both to be very similar knives. They both have that downturned handle, and they both feel great in hand. I just think both of these are very, very good user knives. I will say the Kizer gets a few more design points. This is maybe not the most attractive knife you've ever seen, but it sure is useful. Let's grab a couple of, should throw a pair of 2 in here. Just because, number one, it's, it's got the nested liners, it's the G10, and of course, everyone is very familiar with the pair of 2, so you can get a sense for how big this knife actually is when you can see how much bigger it is than a pair of 2. Let's grab a couple of CRKTs here. Here is the Caligo, sort of, budget flippers is what I'm kind of going for. Here is, another G10. This is the Maven, so another G10 knife with liner locks. The Caligo, I don't know, again, similar design, sort of that downturned handle, similar blade shape, of course, considerably smaller. So if you love this design but would like it in a smaller package, the Caligo might be a good option for you. Or even the Maven. Obviously, the Maven is more similar in construction and, again, very comfortable in hand. We've talked about that with the Maven review. And another similarity that it has is there's that bit of a, now the Maven's is more of a specified finger choil. It stands out a little more, but some similar features here. Obviously the steel is quite a downgrade, but the price is going to be cheaper as well. Okay, so there's the comparisons I've got for you. Let me give you my overall take on the Kizer Kala. I really like this knife. I really enjoy carrying it. It's a larger knife, but it doesn't carry like it's that much larger. It's extremely comfortable in hand with a great utility blade. And so really, honestly, the two main parts of a blade are how comfortable it is and how well it cuts. And this has an extremely comfortable handle and it cuts really well. So I don't know, that to me, that's kind of a win. All right, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the review. There's not a lot out there on this knife. I looked around the interwebs a bit, and so I was pretty excited to share this. I've been really impressed with it, and I think if you like the design as much as I do, you'll probably be impressed as well. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you soon.